Hello, everybody. Welcome to our meeting. I'm going to call our meeting to order and ask everyone to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Difference of opinion.
Oh.
This is the bigger one.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. No.
That flag is always in a different place. Great.
President Clements.
Here.
Vice President Valentine.
Here.
Trustee McNow.
Here.
Trustee Cupper.
Here.
Trustee Clemenson.
Here.
And may we have the recommended action for approving the agenda, please?
Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the interim superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the agenda as written.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. So the next meeting of the Board of Education is next Tuesday, December 7th, sorry, 2 weeks from now, Tuesday, December 17th, 2024 at 7 p.m. here in the middle school, high school library. And the topic will be our annual report from our Director of Curriculum, which is basically the workshop topic is curriculum and instruction report with state assessment. So there's a policy where annually we need to have a presentation on the state assessments, but Josh has really is doing a really good job at thinking about how to really present data to the board. And we've had Maggie and I with Carl have had a couple of conversations with him, really working for those presentations to be as useful as possible to the board. So I think it will be good. The only other comment I wanted to make is, again, I want to thank the community again for voting on November 19th for our capital referendum. There's really now so much for us to do moving forward. That's very exciting. This is on the agenda a little bit later. But the board did have a retreat on Friday where we really kicked off our superintendent search, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the last thing I want to say, at our last meeting, we did talk a little bit when the student who was here, who's I guess the brother of Owen Powers, we did talk a little bit about the cross-country race, but there's a really nice article in the Current this week about the success of our boys cross-country team, and it really raises that Owen Powers finished, I think, third in state in our division, which is the highest any Haldane runner has ever finished. And the boys team finished fourth, which is the highest that any of our cross-country teams have finished. And so just like a truly successful season for sport that doesn't get as much attention, but I thought it was really, I was very glad that I had made the effort to go to the regional race. It was great to see the boys run, great to see the girls run, and great to see those two teams really supporting each other the way that our students always do in sports. So I think there's a lot of things going on. I see you're going to talk about some of this, so I'm actually going to hand it over to Mr. Albano.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Peggy. I just have two topics I want to brief the board on and the community. So you may have heard that the Rockefeller Institute for Government has completed its analysis of state aid in the state of New York. The report was issued yesterday evening. It is very dense, very extensive, over 300 pages of reading. I don't expect that the board was able to do all that reading last night, but I did start to take a look at the report and some of the findings, some of the recommendations. And I'll try to just summarize them, but first it makes a lot of recommendations. If the state were to implement all of the recommendations, their state budget would go up dramatically. So it's unlikely that they would accept all of these recommendations. They probably are going to need to pick and choose, which is complicated. But to give you an example, one thing is the Rockefeller Institute recommends that all electric buses for all school districts in New York State are funded by the state, because school districts are really struggling. They're very expensive still. The infrastructure, the buses themselves are about 3 times a diesel bus. So we are, like many others, seeking grant money to try to implement it, but there are no guarantees. And so that is one recommendation. Another is giving some flexibility with wealth calculations for school districts. So typically household income is used, property values are used, but districts can in their recommendation could pick whichever is more favorable to the school district. Now, that maybe, seems to be a fair recommendation, but again, it's an expensive thing to do. Also, they recommend using a different calculation for economically disadvantaged students. Right now, we use free and reduced lunch, and the Rockefeller Institute points out that that doesn't capture all of the students who are living in poverty and in need. So this would, expand that budget line if implemented. Also, in a similar way, English language learners. Right now, we use our intake survey, to identify students who English is their first language. And the funding is the same whether you are a level 1 English language learner, a level 2, or a level 3. However, the supports we give vary. If you're a beginner, you get more intense support at the school level. If you're more advanced, we start to wean off the support. So the Institute recommends base the funding on actual services that are being provided. So look at those levels of services in each individual district. I'm not sure exactly how we would do that. I think there'd be some responsibility on the district to report it, but they think that is a more fair, way to approach it. Also, they advocate reestablishing separate special education funding outside of foundation aid. That was done in the past. They think we should revert back to that, and also expanding funding for student mental health services, and of course, the data and all of the research supports that as well. So those are all great things, but the state, unlike the federal government, as you know, has a finite budget. The federal government can raise the debt ceiling, they can print money, they can do things that a state cannot do. They must balance their budget. So this is going to be quite the challenge. On the reverse end, they do talk about phasing out something called Save Harmless. Now, this doesn't apply to Haldane, which is good, but districts that over the years were not entitled to increases were given a minimum increase, probably around the same as CPI, was around 3%. It was called Save Harmless. So more affluent districts were getting this for well over 10 years. And the Rockefeller Institute recommends phasing that out over a 5-year period. So there wouldn't be a hit in year 1, but over 5 years, 50% of those increases would be lost, basically. Also, fund balances. Districts with excessively high fund balances would be encouraged to use them before receiving state aid. Now, these are all recommendations. The governor, next steps, the governor is due to provide a proposal to both the Assembly and the Senate on January 21st. Usually that's on time. It's a draft budget that the governor proposes, and the Assembly and the Senate will take a look at the governor's recommendation, and then they make their proposals, and it goes back and forth. In my judgment, and I don't know more than anyone else, I'm sure over the next month or so, all of our School Boards Association, the Superintendent's Association, I'm sure everyone is going to be discussing this at our meetings. But if the intent is to implement these things in year 1, I think it's going to be a challenge, because we're expecting the state to let us know our state aid numbers in about 2 months. And this is such a complex issue. I just don't see it happening, but maybe they will pick some of these recommendations and try to implement them in year 1. We really just don't know until all that legislative process starts to play out up in Albany. So I think for us, what does this mean? Well, we have 2.9 million this year in foundation aid. That's a significant part of our budget. And if there, if a 10% either decrease or increase for us is significant. You know, a 10% decrease, for example, is the cost of 2 teachers. So I think we need to keep a close eye on it. Right now, I'm not seeing anything alarming pertaining to our own, budget. Maybe we would be fortunate and receive, some additional foundation aid. I just don't know, but we will be certain to keep you informed. It'll be part of the budget discussion, which will, start, around February or so, and March and April, it'll really ramp up, and we'll keep a close eye on this. But it's an interesting topic, and from what I'm seeing, organizations are applauding the Rockefeller Institute that a lot of these recommendations are welcomed, like the busing and more funding for special ed and mental health. Like these are things we've been advocating for a long time. The question is, how will it be delivered, and will there be winners and losers as far as public school districts? Any questions or any thoughts on it?
How is it determined if a school is a safe, harmless district?
It's based on their wealth factor.
Okay.
So, districts with a high level of individual wealth and property wealth didn't get any increases above that minimum. It usually mirrored CPI.
And Carl, am I remembering this correctly? So safe harmless is basically, if you apply the formula as written, these are districts for whom their foundation aid would have decreased over time.
Correct.
And they're safe harmless. So what makes them safe harmless is that, again, the formula would have resulted in decreases in state aid, for the way that it's been, foundation aid has been implemented, is there aren't decreases.
The state's been guaranteeing them the same amount.
At least the same amount,
Close.
or not a decrease, and at least I felt like at least like $500 a student or something along those lines, and yeah,
But the legislature kept that, but the governor in the last round.
they tried to do it last year,
She wanted to get rid of safe harmless.
but there has been no heads up of that.
That's a lot.
Right, so, so what'll happen is the governor, like Carl said, governor is gonna go, she'll present what she wants, and then it goes into then the legislature just goes after it. So there'll be a significant amount of pushback on any type of cuts.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges in clawing back safe harmless, if a district is going to lose 20 or 30% of their state aid, even if it's an affluent district, well, there's a tax cap. So, how do you deal with that? The answer may be, well, gee, you don't really deserve state aid, so raise your local property taxes. But the pushback is, well, gee, we can't do that all at once. So the Rockefeller Institute, their recommendation is phase it out like over a 5-year period. So 1/5 per year decrease would be more manageable for those districts, which does make sense. Okay, so
Yeah.
to be continued. Throughout the capital project, as we were doing tours and meetings and speaking with the public and engaging, the question came up frequently, well, when will we get started? And there was a lot of, excitement and enthusiasm around that question. Just to kind of frame a little bit for the board and the community where we are. The Friday before Thanksgiving, CS Arch came down to meet with the entire administrative team, and we right away wanted to talk about next steps. So what we accomplished in that meeting was we will have a district-wide capital project committee, which will be administrators as well as 2 board representatives. That committee will meet monthly, and our first date is December 18th. We will meet monthly with the architect and the project manager, probably for the next 3 years. If there may be a month or so where you get off in the summer, but it is best practice to continually meet and just make sure that everything is on track, and you're holding everyone accountable for what they need to be doing. Additionally, we're creating 6 subcommittees. And I did send this to the board, but for the community, one subcommittee will focus on the student center that will be built on the high school. The other committee will be focused on the STEAM innovation labs, one at the middle school, one at the high school. Also the general education classrooms at the high school, which right now we think will certainly be relocating the foreign language classes out of Mabel Merritt. There'll be another subcommittee for the art classroom, because that looks very different, of course, than a gen ed classroom. The 5th committee will be safety, security, site work, and parking lots. And that, for the most part, is like our district safety committee and members. But all of these, by the way, will have administrators, teachers, and people who will actually be teaching and supporting students out of these spaces. So they will have input. And the last subcommittee are support offices. So the main office, the nurse, the psychologist, social worker, speech, ENL, OT, all those special services, that will be a committee, and all of those people will have input. They may not be at every committee meeting because, obviously pulling them away from working with students is a challenge, but we may bring them in, 2 at a time. We also plan for a lot of these subcommittees to do visits. So CS Arch has done some really good work, similar to what we want to accomplish. We also know of some districts here that did not use CS Arch, but have some, great renovations that they've done recently. So I think the administrators, the teachers, the support staff going out, seeing, talking to other teachers and administrators, coming back, collaborating with the architects, I think that will produce the best results for us.
But that'll be a pretty short process, right, to get to the final plans, right?
This has to happen over the next 4 months.
Yeah.
So that it sounds like a lot of time, but that's really not. There's an awful lot of planning. So they start with schematic designs, then the more detailed our design development phase. That will probably conclude around May. And then they get into the construction designs, which are really in-depth designs that eventually will be submitted to state ed for approval, hopefully by the end of the summer. Then if you do the expedited process, you could potentially have approval, I would say sometime October, November. And then after that, you can go out to bid. And potentially, so the question is, when will we get started? Construction, like shovels in the ground, potentially late winter, early spring. You could actually start doing some construction here. And then the more heavier, construction, like framing out the new classrooms and student center, summer of 2026. Happy to take any questions on that. That was a lot of information.
It's sensitive.
Okay. And one last thing, CS Arch and Palumbo, they have a public relations department. Megan worked very closely with them on the videos and all of the communication. They will continue to offer that service. So when it makes sense, we could continue to provide the community with updates, and they will come to the board and make formal presentations anytime the board wants. So having the 2 board representatives on that district committee, I think whenever it makes sense, we will plan to have them here at the board meeting making formal presentations as well.
Right.
Okay.
And the 2 board members will continue to be me and Maggie. Is that, or do we?
Well, that's up to the board.
That's towards the board.
I leave that up to the board.
So that's actually something we should talk about.
Sure. Yeah, that's that. And it's a big commitment.
I
And
think about it. It is.
Yeah.
That's something you want to talk about now, or something you want to add?
Well, I'm actually trying to figure out, is there a place where it should go in the agenda? But I don't think there's an issue. We're not going to take any action, Megan. You don't see an issue with us like that right now. So
It would be for those monthly owners meetings that we're
right. So
That's where I just say thank you. Appreciate it.
Pardon?
Thank you. Good job.
Well, certainly for the foreseeable future, also, whether a new superintendent would make sense for continuity's sake, at least until the new superintendent is in place, to consider
No,
what future boards might
right.
want to do.
I mean, the only thing could think about, I mean, that does make sense to me. I mean, it's one of the reasons why, starting a few months ago, I requested that Maggie and I start joining these meetings because even though Carl's doing a great job, Carl's only going to be here through this year, and I thought it was really important that somebody have a more historic understanding. So I'm certainly willing to continue to do it. I don't know if it's something that I think Maggie is or not. But then I also think if somebody were just dying to like it was so important to them, then I think that's something we could also think about accommodating.
Yeah, I'm happy to concede my spot, but I can also, because it is interesting.
Yeah.
But I'm also happy to stay on it.
I think realistically, there might be times where not necessarily both of you can attend. The scheduling is not going to be easy because there's a lot of, we've got to talk to it's not just CS Arch, it's some of the other groups that we're working with as well. So we're sort of at the mercy of their schedules.
Right. Well, I feel comfortable staying on, and I'm happy to stay on. But I think, and it sounds like Maggie's open to doing it, but I think if one of you all really wanted to, you should think about it and reach out to me and let me know.
Great.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yes, you're welcome.
Actually, we got the email today from NISBA giving a quick overview of the Rockefeller Institute report, and I was like, I knew Carl would have something very wise to say about it. I didn't do much other than make sure everybody saw the email. Okay, so we were going to have a student recognition right now, but that student is playing. Oops, sorry about that. Is playing in a basketball game, so we'll do that at another night. So we're going to skip that. To very exciting, our special presentation, which is the elementary school visit summary and detail report. So I'm going to sit out here so I can. First detail report of the year.
Okay. So we had the pleasure of hosting Maggie and Peggy the same day as the vote,
Oh, that's right.
which was an exciting day. So elementary school was very busy hosting the community, hosting the board. It was an exciting day. So we had a little pamphlet of just look fors that I gave you guys a copy of just so that you had it. I was asked to just highlight some of the work we've been doing over the last, well, now it's my 6th year, so for the last 6 years, in literacy at the elementary school, just to bring everybody up to date. We have new board members, new community members, new superintendent, and there's just been a lot of changes and a lot of work being done, especially in the area of literacy when it comes to our curriculum and instruction. So just to highlight some of that work. Is there a clicker? Am I asking?
I'll be your clicker.
Perfect. So we updated our mission statement. Now we have it, but we can go to the next slide. So just highlighting the work that's been done over the last few years. So I presented it in 2 ways. It's pretty much the same information, but just in 2 different frames. So this is the work in how we did it over the course of 5 years leading up to this school year, because I think it's important to think about the timeline and what was going on in the elementary that led to some of the work and how it was framed within what was going on in the world and just everything else. So when I started at the elementary, there was already a pilot of the TC Phonics curriculum underway that had been implemented under the previous principal. During that school year, we shut down. COVID was unfortunately a real part of that school year, which meant that a lot of our instruction shifted to remote. All of our instruction that spring shifted to remote. When we started that next school year, we had officially adopted the TC Phonics curriculum, shifting from foundations, and we had adopted the TC units of study in reading and writing. Those had been used as the framework, but hadn't been adopted by the board until that spring. But when we implemented in that fall, We weren't allowed to hold small group instruction. Kids weren't allowed to be within 6 feet of each other. We weren't allowed to pull kids together for academic intervention from alternative homerooms. So if Mr. McNall was in one homeroom and Ms. Cupper was in another homeroom, but their skills were similar and I was the reading instructor, I couldn't pull you together, because if you ended up having COVID, now I would have to send Mr. McNall home for 10 days, or 15, or however long it might end up being. So we weren't allowed to cross-contaminate homerooms. So it really was a true impediment to our assessment of whether our instructional resources were having an impact on our students, whether these resources were good resources to have chosen, because our phonics instruction, was TC a good resource or not? We were masked. We couldn't show students how to make sounds with their mouths because they couldn't see our mouths. We couldn't see their mouths. All of that was truly difficult for our teachers, for our students, for our families. It was a really difficult time to be teaching students to read, make sounds, or any of that. And that was the conditions under which we had adopted a new phonics program. We then returned the following year, and our teachers were really struggling with what they had been seeing in the classroom, really wanted to do better for our students, not just because of the curriculum change, but because they saw how much students were struggling with reading, with where everything had been over the spring of 2020, and then the fall and everything with COVID. And so our teachers were really motivated to say, TC and all of that aside, is there anything we can do to help our kids make up for all of the impact that we've had over the last year and a half? So many of our teachers then started attending professional development locally and regionally, and just doing a lot of their own research into what could they do to help our students with reading. And they then came and were bringing back those resources through our after-school professional development to turnkey practices they were learning about, which is now the science of reading. But at the time, that term wasn't what was being used necessarily, but they were doing professional development on phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, bringing back strategies such as the heart word strategy, which it's just one particular strategy for words that don't follow phonics rules. When you have a word that doesn't follow the rule, that can't be decoded, what are ways that you can teach students to learn that word? And how to incorporate decodable text into instruction. So those were being brought back and turnkeyed by our teachers here at Haldane. We started using Megan Hargrave to work with our teachers. I'm not sure actually now that I think about it, whether it was that year or the following year, but Miss Megan Hargrave did a professional development on science of reading with our teachers in the fall of 2022 on what science of reading was telling us was the best practices for our students. So at that November 22 Superintendent's Conference Day, all of our teachers got together and learned about that together. We incorporated decodable texts into our instruction that year and started phasing out the use of leveled literacy texts when we were using them for direct teaching instruction. Shifted away from practices such as 3Qing, which the research was really saying was some of the most detrimental reading strategies when it came to helping kids learn how to read, and continued our work on professional development for our teachers. And then last year, our biggest focus, based on science of reading research, was on how we assessed students and their reading, and how using those assessments could direct our instruction for them and target our instruction on reading. So last year, after the board visit, you had asked, like, all right, so what are you using all this data on? How does it tell you what to do with students? And that last year's presentation, we had followed a particular student, and if we saw what their NWA looked like, how did we then dig into that? And what was the HLP telling us? And how could we then follow that student through their progress monitoring and determine whether what we were doing worked or didn't work, and what would our steps be? So that HLP work was what we really focused on last year. 19 of our teachers attended the SUNY New Paltz coursework to get their micro-credential in reading. And our reading league, we partnered with the Reading League to get specific professional development on additional science of reading strategies and assessment, which we've continued to this year. So that's sort of our timeline of like how we got here. And if you'd switch. And then this is some of that same information, so I'm not going to go into as much detail, but why we did some of that, I wanted to provide some of the context for what those strategies, why we picked those strategies as we went through it. So these are linkable, and if in that you can dig into this and spend as much or as little time as you want to gain your own knowledge of the science of reading, but each of the turquoise ones is clickable. So one of the articles that, as I was saying, like, how do I best help my teachers? Many of my teachers are really motivated and they're bringing me along in this process, I'll be honest, because, you know, some of you were on the board when I was hired, but some of you were not. I was a high school science teacher. You know, my literacy instructional strategies have grown as I've worked with really competent reading teachers along the way and spent a lot of time in primary classrooms watching the amazing things they do that then I brought home and then worked with my kindergartner and been like, okay, now I can help you read because I watched Katie Wild teach kindergartners how to read. And then now my fourth grader is a better reader, having sat in many primary classrooms. And I got my micro credential in reading too. So, but in reading this article, I'm like, what are the best ways for leaders to help their building embrace the science of reading? These are some of the action steps that Josh Elder and I said, like, what are the best things we can do to help bring this along? So the first thing was like schooling yourself and making sure that, yes, Mr. Elder and I are making sure we're aware of all the best practices and our teachers are. So making sure that we're up to date on the professional development, analyzing and adjusting our assessments. So that's where that HLP and incorporating the DIBELS and making sure that our assessments, we weren't just using those things like the NWEA, which isn't aligned with science of reading. It's a good piece of information, and longevity of the NWEA is beneficial, and its alignment with the state testing is beneficial for those measures, but it's not as beneficial in telling us whether kids can read and whether our strategies are going to help them learn to read and decode. DIBELS is going to help us learn why can't they read or why can't they decode these words and how do we help them learn to read. The NWEA will give us information on, hey, where's their comprehension and does it give us a good prediction on how they'll do on the state test and how can we help them with that? But that's a different measure. So making sure that our assessments also have these other measures for helping them learn how to read, which is a critically important skill, and making sure that we have those assessments was a really important step for us. We can go to the next one. Analyzing our curriculum and securing good resources. So like when we looked at our academic intervention, making sure that when we adopted PAF, that it was a resource that used explicit phonics instruction, that was I'm losing my word, but it's it's aligned with science of reading practices, and it's well rated within, you know, the What Works Clearinghouse, within well-respected analytical tools. PAF is a good resource. That we're incorporating resources such as the decodable texts. So those are a resource that is analyzed and shown to have good outcomes for students. So making sure that we are incorporating those into our instruction. UFly, Haggerty, Heartward strategies. Those are resources that are shown to really help kids make progress. So making sure that those are incorporated into our classrooms. And then making sure that we're looking at our curricular practices. So the Reading League released a curriculum evaluation tool where you could look at your practices. And what it does is it says, you know, are you doing this in your classroom? If you are, it's not great. And we sat back with each of our grade levels and did an honest reflection on which practices were we still using. And the teachers would say, oh gosh, I actually am still using that. We need to work on removing that. Or, oh no, we've done a really good job. We're not using that. We're not using the level text. We've done a really good job. We've replaced those with decodables. Or we've done a really good job. We've removed all the lessons that refer to 3Qing, and we've switched to heart words, or we've switched to breaking down words into syllables. I think we've done a really good job of removing that. but they were really reflective. And then they sat with Megan Hargrave and they said, hey, here's a spot. We don't think we've done a great job here of removing this strategy, and we're not sure of what to replace it with. That's what we need help with. So last year, that's what we used our third set of 3 professional development days. We did the reflection with the curricular evaluation tool independently in grade level groups at the superintendent's conference day. And then they met with Megan and said, all right, we'd like to go through these that we've flagged as our most needy areas. Can you help us replace the practices and help us direct us to how we do that? So we did those at grade levels and then sought the resources to replace those practices. Redesigning schedules isn't something we've spent a lot of time, well, we spent a lot of time redesigning schedules, but not when it came to reading. Our schedule has some of the practices that they most recommend. We have 90 minutes dedicated to ELA, 45 on paper for writing, 45 on paper for reading. I'll be honest, our teachers sometimes incorporate that in like a project-based approach where sometimes it's, you know, reading and writing are together or reading and science are together. But we do have time that's chunked in a good amount of time. Our K2 have an additional amount of time for phonics, and K through 5 have the extended learning time block. We talked a little bit about that at last year's board meeting also, but not everybody was here, and I know our community watched as well, but that's our time where our teachers can pull together students for targeted intervention. It's also our time where our reading specialists and math specialists can pull students out if they need extra help without them missing their core instruction. So it means that they can get pulled out of the classroom without missing their reading, their writing, their science, their social studies. It's a time when their teachers are not doing that initial instruction set aside. And then if a student doesn't need to get pulled out for any extra instruction, they can be doing additional work or a passion project or additional pushing kind of projects. And then providing additional professional learning. So this year in November, all of our K-5 teachers did an additional work with the Reading League, who came in and specifically worked on phonemic awareness and how they can assess students on their ability to work on breaking syllables apart and putting them back together, blending them together, and then how to intervene if they assess a student and find that their phonemic awareness skills are not where they should be. So everybody K through 6, because Ms. McCullum also joined in on that professional development. And then Megan Hargrave is coming back in the spring in more of a coaching model with our teachers rather than grade level professional development, but more coaching with teachers this spring. One thing. So, and then with that, we are now moving out of, with all of this, the end result is we know that the resource we have adopted, which is the Teachers College Units of Study and Phonics, is not adequate. We've done a lot of patching and work and are very confident that our teachers have put together curriculum and instruction that is doing good things for our students. But it's because they've done a lot of work to pull out practices that are not adequate and put in practices that are good for kids. And that's not sustainable long term, and it's leading to choppiness, because when you do that, the kindergarten is replacing with one strategy, and then the first grade is replacing with a different strategy, and you don't end up with a common thread that goes through. The reason we've done that is because pretty much across the state, everyone was using the Teachers College Units of Study. And as we look, we polled regional schools. If you say, what are you using and what resources are you thinking about? Everybody's either we're in the middle of searching, we're looking, we're not sure, we just started, we are trialing this. Everybody's in a space of patching. And so in that, we don't want to adopt something and rush when everybody's like a lot of the publishers are saying, oh, we're adjusting, we're incorporating. You don't want to be adopting something that then is also not adequate or in a good place. So we've spent this time making sure our teachers know what a good resource would have. and having all of them receive the micro credential and really do the research and get a good solid understanding and a really good solid foundation of what it looks like and what they want those practices to look like. Like right now they're using the UFly phonics and doing a fantastic job teaching phonics with that resource. So when they go and they look at a phonics resource, they're going to say, well, I know UFly does this really well. Well, maybe we want to adopt UFly. Maybe that's the resource we want. Or maybe something does it better. Or maybe something has a reading and writing component and those kinds of strategies all together in a nice cohesive block. But at least now we know this does it like this and it works really well for kids. And we can then look for it. Well, we either want that or we want something that does it better. Whereas if we'd started that process 2 years ago, either there wasn't something that existed, or we wouldn't have had the knowledge to find what would have been good for kids. So now we had a resource selection committee. We came together the week before Thanksgiving, or the full week before Thanksgiving. We came up with the critical questions of what we like about the current resources we've had and the current patches that we have. So with what we're using for grammar, because quite honestly, the Teachers College writing doesn't have grammar. We've been teaching grammar the whole time using teacher-created resources under grammar. So what do we want it to have for grammar instruction? What do we want it to have for spelling instruction? What do we want it to have for handwriting instruction? What would we want it to have for phonics instruction? What would we want it to have for content knowledge building? What would we want all of those things to look at? What are we looking for? And then a list of resources that are rated well on Ed Reports, What Works Clearinghouse, and rated well by surrounding districts that have recently gone through a curricular search for ELA resources. Or the Reading League has worked with a few districts recently and gone through a process and said, well, a few districts have selected these couple of resources, to then get samples of those and begin that search process. So you can, the link there has some of the questions we asked, has some of the resources we're looking at. And we're going to be continuing that search over the next few months. I would say there's 2 camps we may end up in. We may end up in an ELA resource, which would be for the reading and the writing. And when I say reading, I mean more the content reading, not the how to read reading. So like a reading and a writing resource, and then a phonics resource. Or we may end up with a resource that does all 3. And there may be some supplementing that we need to do. I doubt any of those will incorporate the typing piece. So we may end up having to use additional resources to support the typing of writing. Or we may end up having to have an additional spelling piece. Some of them don't incorporate that as well. So we may end up needing to adopt some minor resources or minor tools that support those things. It'll depend on which ones we find. You never find a curricular resource that does everything perfectly. So it'll be evaluating them and finding the one that we think does the most things really well, and then finding some tools to support the things that we think that we can supplement the best. You know, like if we find something that does a lot of things really well, and then we think it needs a tool to support spelling, that may be an easy thing to backfill with our, you know, our knowledge. We've been doing it on our own here at Haldane with an alternative, you know, teacher created resources separately during these past units. So that's sort of where we are with ELA, reading, and phonics. So before we move on to the actual building goals, I'll pause there.
First of all, it's very triggering to have to be taken through the
Through
pandemic
five,
again.
for reading.
It's like, oh my God, I was there for every step of it.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I remember this. Just a question about
Yeah.
at each grade level, as you're talking about the teacher selected materials and curricular, there's consistency across the grade levels. So there's an agreement as what at first, second, third, fourth grade. There's
Yes.
consistency from class to class as
Correct.
what is being delivered.
And I would say there's consistency even across K-5, it's just that when you have the TC units of study, let's originally, right? The resource has a map of when and where and even some language that you use. So even if we use the same heart words as an example, right? So if we say, all right, because we're not going to use 3Qing as our way. So 3Qing would say, oh, I don't know this word. I'm just gonna, book is decodable. I can't think of one off the top of my head. I'm on the spot, but book, but I can see he's looking at a book. So I'm gonna guess that it's book because I'm using the picture as a clue to read the word book, right? So cueing is when you use the other things on the page to read the word instead of decoding the word, right? Heart word is when you say like, oh, I don't yet know the word that oh says so it actually is. I'm catching up to myself, but I don't yet know that says so for me I have to memorize that. So you'd put a heart under it and you'd memorize that. Right now I don't know that word, that rule, so I'm just going to memorize that when I see it says for now. Later I'll learn the phonics rule for why that is, right? If we all use heart words but we don't have a curricular resource that tells us the exact how and when and where we do it and what words we use to explain it to kids. Even if we're using that same strategy, we end up with some inconsistencies and slight differences, and so it just doesn't have that common thread across the 5 grades in the same way as when we all have like a manual that we refer to, that then we end up with some common language and they hear it the same way. And they end up with that building of building blocks across of it. So we have a lot of common agreements right now, and we have a lot of common professional development. It's just more scattered than I think we would all like it to be. And the grade levels have a lot of consistency because they have a lot of common planning time. They actually have all 5 days of the week right now for common planning time. So they get together and talk about it and develop a lot of common lessons. But they don't have it between grade levels. So that's hit and miss, and they share resources, but the language and the exact way that they talk about it just isn't as cohesive as it could be if you had a common resource that could support that development. If that makes, does that?
That's complete sense.
Like, that we have, been following this, but I find this presentation just to be so interesting because it brings all these little different pieces together. And it tells this really important story about this long-term investment that the district made in literacy instruction. And it brings, Christine's right, she's talked about this in different places along the way, but it brings it all together in one cohesive story. And to me, one of the things that I find really spectacular, honestly, about this presentation is it gives me a kind of insight into the continuous improvement that Christine has led as a building leader about something that's so important, and how, so this continuous improvement, this is sustained investigation, and what really goes into like just really high quality teaching and learning. I mean, I'll be honest, I think it's rare for us to get such a deep dive on something, but I feel like, again, early literacy is critically important. There was a narrative, or has been a narrative in the community, that this was a place where Haldane had room to improve. It's a narrative that we wanted to address, and I think this presentation goes a really long way to really showing all the work that's been done at Haldane. And then you get this like really beautiful insight into just like all these different pieces and all the things that Christine is managing, and all the how hard the teachers are working, and really sort of where this longer term investment has brought us. I mean, I think it's really, I'm really appreciative of this presentation.
And I I can't compliment our teaching staff enough in that.
Yeah, it sounds like, yeah, they were really, you said leading me along the way, yeah.
Number one, there are a number of our teaching staff who really are leading it. And number two, if they weren't truly invested in ensuring that these practices were in place each day, our students wouldn't be making the progress, because it truly has been a weeding process of taking the lessons out and replacing them. And, you know, I know John's not here, but in honor of John, who is no longer with us, and Michelle needs to say, and how do we know it works? That's your line.
John's voice.
How do we know?
So how do we know it works?
I don't want to steal Josh's thunder for next presentation, but I did ask his permission. So if we skip to one more slide, the standard for what kids should be able to do if you have good reading instruction is 85% of your students with good tier 1 instruction should be hitting the 35th percentile or above in their oral reading fluency. So this is the fall, winter, and spring oral reading fluency for our students for 23-24, the first time we were able to measure it and assess it. So fall, winter, and spring of last year, you don't do an oral reading fluency in kindergarten because they aren't there yet.
Mhm.
You can do it in the spring, and we did do it in the spring, but we didn't have the measure when we sent the data off. So if you look at spring grade 1, 93% of our first graders in the spring had an oral reading fluency above 35%. 84, 91, 86, 84 in second grade, 96, 90, 92 in third grade, 86, 88, 86, 85, 80, 81. So Josh and I met with the Reading League who does all this data. I said, wait, should we be concerned about the 81? They said, no, like these numbers bounce right around. The fact that all of your numbers are right around that 85% tells us that your tier 1 instruction is strong. You don't want to focus on any one of the numbers too hard. This is 1 year, one moment, one time. You'd want to look at this over a couple of years before you focused on any one number. You are in a really good place with your tier 1 instruction. Your next questions, and again, I don't want to steal Josh's thunder for next month, but like, you know, my next questions are things like, okay, so this is our 35% or above. How many are right at 35%? How many of our students are at 40%? Where can we be pushing? You know, where are our students excelling? Then what do we do with our students who are in AIS, the kids who aren't hitting 35%? What can we do with our tier 2 and 3? It doesn't mean we don't have questions. It doesn't mean we don't have work that can be done. There's always work that can be done. We want to be better than good. But it means that the patches and the things that we're doing with our students are good. We are doing good work with our reading instruction. Yes, we're going to keep doing more. And I hope that a good, solid reading resource is going to get us to an even better place. But we are doing good work with our students.
Just two things,
Yeah.
Christine. I really do appreciate actually the deep dive. So this is actually really valuable. I like to see that the teachers are incredibly flexible and adaptable, trying to do everything that they can, and you perceive within the next year, few months, you're going to see that common thread develop.
So when we adopted our math resource, I can't remember when you joined us, but it took us a year and a half to adopt a math resource. And we had a little bit of this conversation when Maggie and Peggy came to visit. A lot of that was when we got that committee together, our committee was on very different places because some really liked our previous resource. They were looking for some different things. We had some different opinions on what would be the best kind of resource. And it took us a while to get to some consensus about what we wanted and then to really dig into those resources and figure it out. I would say one really good thing about where we are right now with reading is everybody has a really solid common goal for what we want. So I don't think it's going to take us very long to come to consensus around what we want and which of the resources looks good. So I think I think by the end of the year, we'll be coming to you with this, at least for phonics. Reading and writing, I think we may have a little bit longer just because there's a little bit more, like what kind of content reading do we want kids to have? What's a writing resource that's doing well? What do we want to do with spelling and grammar? That might take a little bit longer, but at least for phonics. And then I think we'll be developing a really good common thread K2 for phonics, initial early literacy instruction. And I think that would be a really good place to be in for the end of the year. And then we can build the core ELA instruction.
Sure. And then on this data, and you don't want to do too much focusing on it, but that grade 5 would have been
That's
COVID year, grade 2, 3, right?
So that grade 5 is
Our current 6.
that. Yeah, so that's the same
1,
age
2.
as my daughter. So they would have been.
K through
They
second.
would have. Yeah, they would have been. They would have
Two.
gone out in first and been in.
Yeah. So they're very
The full COVID in second.
Yeah, so those are very foundational years.
Yeah.
So for reading, so recognizing that,
Yeah.
I mean, these are still, positive.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
very much so.
And just to tie this back.
And 81 is still not.
Oh, yeah. No.
Right, because tying this back right to MT, right, so the district's efforts towards multi-tiered
Mhm.
systems of support, right? I mean, just, that's really what we're talking about here, right? That's really, this is what, Christina is really making this really important point that, the instruction that we're doing that is really getting a high percentage of the kids, meeting benchmarks.
Yeah, and I don't want to focus on any one cohort, but that grade level, we have a special class reading cohort. We have so we have other things
Mhm.
for a cohort for the 20% that aren't.
Well, that
We have
would
a
just
number of
drive,
interventions to
drive your, your tiered support
Correct.
to structure that. That's all you
Make
do.
sure that
So
we-
then
Yeah.
and your team is looking at, how they, and sounds fantastic because they're actively engaging in trying to do as many different things as they can to encourage children to read, and instead of and also the idea of let's not adopt a curriculum too early, right, where people are kind of building the bridge while they're crossing it. So probably a wise decision.
hindsight, I mean, I sort of regret, I think that's a little bit what TC Phonics was. Hindsight's 2020, but the initial criticisms for the TC units of study for reading and writing were that there wasn't explicit phonics instruction. So then TC Phonics came out. A lot of districts quickly adopted TC Phonics to fill that gap.
Well, I mean, they have
waited.
they have a product that they
Yeah.
ship out. They try to hit it, but it's great. You've invested in, the district has invested in the people, right, that actually do the significant amount of work. So, thank you.
All right. We'll see. Some of the others maybe won't take as long, but the official goals are goal 1, support the bond referendum. I think you guys are pretty up to date on that. So I don't think you'll have a lot of questions.
And Christine was at a lot of different meetings.
So my goal was to
tours.
support that work. I went to the Q&As, went to PTA events, participated in tours, put out information in the newsletters, provided information to staff. I'm leading the STEAM room small group. Selfishly, I was a science teacher. That's a fun group to lead for me. I'm going to be a member of the support staff room, but Dr. Silkey's going to be the lead facilitator of that one since she's going to be in the main office. So I'll be a participant in that, but I'm going to lead facilitating the STEAM room conversation. So that'll be our next steps. And I'm sure all of you will be part of that work at different parts. So I'll keep that one brief. Goal 2 is continuing our work on the use of data, including the Haldane learner profile and intervention. So that includes that work on DIBELS and literacy that we just talked about. So I'm not going to go into that as much, but an interesting part of that is shifting it from being the Haldane literacy profile that we have talked about to being the Haldane learner profile. And some of the work we're doing right now is trialing some number sense screeners and the Acadience math probes with our students. They, in the past, one of the things we haven't had as much of are normed math assessments. We have the NWEA, we have the state test data, we have classroom assessments in math, but there are fewer normed math pieces. So there's some of the things like students should be able to do within math. Do they just count on, or can they do they count up, or can they count on? Meaning, do you have to start at 0 and count up 0, 1, 2, 3, or can you put 3 in your head and then count on? Or can you do doubles? Can you count by 3s? Can you do those things? So there's those sorts of screeners that you can do with children, and the Acadience math probes test their number sense to see where some of their gaps within math are, in similar ways to where the Dibbles test their phonemic awareness. So we're trialing some of those and then seeing how they line up with some of our grade level standards to see how they give us information on students and their math abilities relative to what we're assessing in different grade levels, to see what we might use to determine whether a student needs additional help in math. And then we would add those. So within, like if you look at our old MTSS plan, it says, these are our entry and exit criteria using NWEA and using the state test data. We're looking to add things from our HLP in math and ELA so that we have a more comprehensive entry and exit criteria that doesn't just look at those pieces. So grade level assessments and benchmarks would be used for both math and ELA, and then we would update the MTSS plan with all of that information. So more to come. So right now we're trialing them just to see. We haven't used them before, so we want to make sure, do they give us information that aligns with what we would see in the classroom and what we get from our kids. So that's that.
You said that the data could help to identify students who need extra help. What about identifying kids who are a little bit more advanced and meeting their needs? So
the math probes, they dig into what their number sense is on grade level. I haven't given the math probes myself, so the only way I've heard them used is to see whether their number sense is developing appropriately or not. So I'm not sure that these would do that.
Yes.
They might. I'd have to look. I don't know that they would give up, that those particular screeners would give that information. The NWEA and the Khan Academy do give us that information.
Mm-hmm.
So we use the Khan Academy and the MAPS Accelerator. So within the NWEA, it tells us what a student should be learning next.
Mm-hmm.
And the MAPS Accelerator ties into Khan Academy, which is leveled. So if a student gets something right, it pushes them on to the next skill.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a couple of teachers say that can be frustrating because some of those next skills, you need a little bit of instruction. Like it doesn't just, just jump into some of those higher levels of math without a little bit of instruction on how to approach a problem. So when they just get it on the computer without some instruction on how to approach it, can be a little bit of a frustrating experience when it's independent work. But they do get some time on more challenging problems there. And what our teachers have done is when the kids come, then they use ELT to say, okay, let's take a step back. That thing that was frustrating you on independent work, this is how you do it, and using ELT that way. But I don't know that those probes would be the appropriate assessment for that.
Thanks.
Goal 3, this one might have some questions, is planning and preparing for the addition of pre-K and the transition of 5th grade. So for 5th grade, Mary Ann and Julia and I have been collaborating on the schedule and just looking at how we can move 5th grade to the middle school. Moving the 5th grade to the middle school isn't directly a me project in that's making the secondary schedule for them to arrive, but wherever I can help them, I'm helping. So we've been looking at the cafeteria. I mean, that continues to be the tricky part of it. So we're just looking at different ways we can schedule middle school and high school for lunch. So we're trialing a few different things and just playing with it. We're going to reconvene the master scheduling committee and just have them reflect on the changes we made for this year. There are some things that I'm sure people like, and as always, I'm sure there's some things that they don't. So if there are any of the things that they didn't, are they things that we can fix or not? We'll look at that. We're also going to be meeting with the 4th grade to just think about what we need to do with the 4th graders next year to prepare them to enter the middle school the following year. So as you know, our current 5th grade is departmentalized. Do we want to incorporate any departmentalization into 4th grade? Do we want to do that the whole year? Or do we want to do that just in the spring? You know, some discussions around switching classes and transitioning. So we're going to be having those discussions in the next few months to think about what we would want that to look like. There are, while we still have the 5th grade, there are some staffing challenges to departmentalizing 4th grade. But we'll look at that and see. I think there's probably some benefit to doing some of it, but we'll be working with that in the 4th grade. And then next year, obviously, we'll need to have 2 graduation ceremonies, 2 sets of culminating events, you know, 2 sets of field trips, that sort of thing, so that they all have a culminating elementary experience. Okay, so Carl, Catherine and I met with the Office of Early Learning. We have a request for proposal to be sent out to community partners. We were just talking about timing earlier today, so whether we send that out just before the holidays, but give them a longer amount of time to complete it, or we just wait and send it out after the holidays. But either way, it's probably going to be due the end of January, beginning of February. So the state requires us to reach out to community partners, even though we're opening a pre-K here. We have to attempt to work with a community partner for 10% of our slots. So our maximum number of slots is 42. So our 10% slot is 4 or 5 students. So we have to attempt to find 4 or 5 seats for kids in a community-based organization. And the idea of that is that we won't have before or after school care here. So attempting to find somewhere that has 4 or 5 seats would allow somebody who needs before or after school care to enroll their child in a community-based preschool that has before or after school care, where they could have UPK there, and that family would pay for before or after school care, but they would receive UPK for free through the district. We may not find, we didn't have anybody who took us up on UPK the last time, but we were looking for a full classroom the last time. We may find somebody who is willing to offer us a couple of seats. We may not, but we're at least going to make the required attempt. If we don't find anybody, then we can petition the state for a waiver, which means we tried, we did a, you know, we did a true search. We made a, what's the word?
RFP?
Yeah, well, we did a full faith effort to make a partnership. So we'll reach out. It doesn't have to be within the district. So there are community-based organizations in Beacon who have partnered with the Beacon schools. They may be willing to give us 4 or 5 seats. You know, the parents would provide the transportation. So they may be willing to. We'll reach out. So that RFP will go out to the Cold Spring community-based preschools, the Garrison community-based preschools, the Beacon community-based preschools, and we'll also put an ad in the newspaper and publish it on the website in case there's anybody regionally that we haven't thought of who's interested and sees it and wants to apply. Again, if nobody's interested, we'll put in for the waiver. We've started going on school visits to some regional pre-K programs just to see what they have and look for ideas for our own program. We're selecting curriculum to offer in our program. I'm working on the budget, furniture, curriculum, resources. We're going to put out the advertisement to families for registration with the print kindergarten registration. So that usually is in the beginning of January. So we'll put that in the newspaper and on the website and on the Facebook page that says kindergarten registration is opening. And so is pre-K registration. In February, we'll have the kindergarten family information night. We'll also have a pre-K family information night. That first information night will be about how it will work. So UPK is a lottery. We will have more students eligible for UPK than we will have seats. We will only have 18 seats. So let's say 30 families register for pre-K. We will then, by random lottery, choose 18 students who will be able to participate. We'll choose all 30 in order. So we'll have slot 1 through 30. And then the remaining families would be on a wait list in order. It's a totally blind lottery. So we can't look at need, we can't look at special education, we can't look at anything. It's just totally blind.
No sibling preference?
No sibling preference.
No sibling preference.
Later in the year, once we know who's been selected for the program, then we would do a family orientation of like, hey, this is what the day looks like. Meet the teacher. Here's the classroom. Come see the program. We would do student screenings like we do kindergarten screenings. And then we'll complete the state application to say, hey, please let us have a pre-K program in the summer. Which is weird, but that's how that works. But they told us they don't say no once we complete the application. So that's pre-K.
What are the age, are the age requirements basically the same?
They have to
as
be 4
kindergarten?
by December 1st.
By December 1st.
Yeah. So for kindergarten, they have to be 5 by December 1st. For pre-K, they have to be 4 by December 1st.
So if it's 10% who can go to another community-based preschool, but there's only 18 seats, why would it be 4 or 5
We
kids? Why
have
wouldn't it be
funding for
1.8?
up to 40.
Oh, it's funding based. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
so we only have space, we don't have room or the ability to really have 2 classrooms here. Theoretically,
Yeah.
if a community-based organization said, hey, we want to offer you a whole classroom of 18 kids, they could. They just didn't last time, so I don't anticipate that we will get that. But hypothetically, preschool Q says, yes, we want to offer you 18 slots. We could be running a class of 18 here and a class of 18 there. And that would be great. Then we would have plenty of seats. But I just don't I'll cross my fingers. But what I'm really hoping for is someone to have 4 or 5 slots. And it could be a couple places. Somebody could offer us 2 and someplace else could offer us 2.
Okay.
And that's allowed too. It would be more difficult to manage if a place offered us 1, another place offered us 1, another place offered us, because we're required to work with their teachers and have them come to professional development, do 4 site visits, do observations. And that means that then I'm going to observe 4 different classrooms, 4 different, like that's a lot. But if we had 2 and 2, that's something I wouldn't not consider. It'd be more to manage, but it'd be possible.
And if those placements were offered up, that's also through lottery, or right? So it's the same.
Yeah, so you would register and you could say, I'm registering my child for preschool. I'm only interested in Haldane. And then Michelle could register. She said, I'm only interested in Nest. And then if I said, you could have Haldane, just nope, I can't do it because I need before or after school. So for myself, when I registered, my daughter did UPK at Beacon. I couldn't have her do the school-based program at the time. It was only half day.
Right.
They didn't have transportation. I couldn't very well leave Haldane, drive to Beacon, pick her up at noontime, and then drive her to daycare. That wouldn't have worked. So I said I can only have her go if she gets the spot at the community-based organization, which she got. But if she'd gotten a school-based spot, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So we may have families that are in either of those. Like we might have a family that's only willing to take a Haldane spot. We might have a family that's only willing to take a community-based spot.
Right. And does the state offer like an instrument for what that lottery should be and how it should get like, or?
They just say it has to be totally random. I mean, there's random
Yeah.
name generators, there's
You
hats.
see, if I could just
Yeah.
add, just to manage expectations, we only can offer partner preschool programs $5,400
Yeah,
per
that's-
student.
Yeah,
Right.
It's highly unlikely if, I believe many of our local programs have waiting lists.
Yeah.
And if they're charging 12 or 14, 15,000, I think that's typically the range. It's very unlikely that they're going to pass up on someone who's willing to pay 12,000 to take a student for 5,400. So
Yeah.
we must make a good faith effort to partner, but it's unlikely that someone will take us up on the offer, just
I mean,
to be clear.
I mean, those of us who were on the board, when, I actually don't know how much we talked about in board meetings, how much we talked about it in agenda meetings, but like Christine already has made
Put up-
valiant efforts for years to try and take advantage of this UPK funding that's been
We put out the
available.
RFP 3 times
Yeah,
before this.
so
but, you know,
she's worked so
Again, looking
hard.
for 18 slots.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe this will be different, so we'll see.
So,
Yeah.
and we didn't open it up regionally
Outside, yeah.
before,
Right, so,
which is the only thing that makes me a little more hopeful.
yeah, well, let's see, but yeah,
So
not for
that-
us trying, we haven't been able to.
I think that's, just for any families that are watching or looking at this later, just what they could expect. The family information night we have set for February 12th, that's just where they can ask questions about like the lottery, the process, what that would look like. We expect registration to open up in February. The lottery would be around March or April. And then waitlist notification would be rolling after that. You know, anybody who was registered early and right then when they got picked, we'd say, oh, you're on the wait list. But if they registered in August, they could register and they could be on the late list and we would keep it open. That's done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank
That was
you.
great.
Any other
That was
questions?
great.
All right.
Very
Informative.
comprehensive. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Son. Of course. It's a lot of things. I'm sorry. It's so
Good
long.
stuff.
Stuff.
All right.
So we're now at the opportunity for the first communication from the public. The Haldane Board of Education desires and values input from the entire school community. This first public comment session is reserved for comments on any special presentations or active agenda items. For those who wish to address the board, we'd ask you to sign in and state your name for the record. Although, I'll read the whole thing. We'd ask you to keep your remarks to 3 minutes or less. Disparaging remarks and discussion of district personnel are strongly discouraged. And while we do not engage in dialogue, we want you to know that we're listening. All right, so next we have our information reports that will be on our, oh my God, January 2025 business meeting agenda. And so next then is consent agenda minutes. This is the minutes for both our November 19th meeting as well as our exec session minutes. So may I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Next, we have committee minutes, so committees from the minutes from the district-wide safety team. And the wellness team, actually, Carl, it looks like the wellness committee is thinking about maybe wanting to change their charge. And so I guess we'll just have to see. I assume somebody will want to come and talk to us about that.
Yes. yeah.
I know this is
We'll
picking
schedule
up
that.
on the conversations they had last year.
Mhm.
So really appreciate both committees. Moving into consent agenda.
I just wanted to,
sorry.
to comment one thing.
Yeah.
I noted, and one of the treasurer report, the budget transfer had
Oh, go
11,
ahead.
well, it had 11, it connects. There was $11,000 that was moved to signage. And I was going to ask Catherine about it. But then when I read the minutes from the safety meeting, I realized that it was all towards like emergency responders saying that sometimes when they arrived on campus, they did not know where to go. And so that is what I'm guessing the money is going toward, is better signage for emergency responders, or is it just better signage all through campus for everybody?
It's an expansion of those, a year ago, maybe we got those blue signs, the blue bigger directional
Yeah.
signs. So more of those
Yeah.
filling in some of the gaps, particularly at, the back entrance of Cedar Street and what you can access from
Ah.
where, and the fact that you don't access the athletic fields, I think for as small as we are, it's still a kind of confusing campus.
Mhm.
So it's expanding on those signs. And then it's also some signage that is campus rules, for lack of a better word, and what's permitted and what's not permitted on campus.
That signage, it's interesting because the signs took a really long time to be made, but they really recognize, and this is something I think Phil did.
Signs were part of the first
Badminton, yeah.
capital referendum.
Yeah. It was so important. It's really important, right? Like, what's the main building? What's, like, those things people just aren't gonna know. But anyway,
Yeah,
thanks
yeah.
for bringing it up.
That's kind of fit together nicely. So I was like, ooh, I like that.
Consent agenda financial, may I have a motion, please?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda personnel, may I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
I don't think there's anything we need to, actually, I am gonna say one thing about this. So anyway, it's always so exciting to see our students come back and work in our district. And I don't always recognize the name, but Abby Stoll was in Pete's grade. So I was just like, it's so great. And it happens a lot, to see kids come back.
Are you talking about Abby Stoll?
Yeah.
She's also
Coaching.
She always, I don't think I
Coaching.
knew that.
She's coaching the JV girls.
Yeah, no, that's really, it is so, you notice it when you really recognize the name, but it's great to see kids come back. Including.
I just
Yeah,
want
absolutely.
to comment.
Did I keep- Did you want to talk about the
Just about
SRO?
No, just about the payroll.
Oh, good.
I might have,
Sure.
I might have it in my house. Don't worry.
Just a brief comment. You do have on the agenda recommendation to appoint a payroll clerk. First, I want to compliment Catherine Platt and Josh Elder for having an ongoing search. It's a very difficult position to fill. They did interviewing for 2 months straight, met many people and a lot of qualified people, but we really think Christine Fury is a good fit for
She
us.
has a great resume.
Yes, she has experience. It's at a municipality, not particularly a school. There's a bit of a learning curve, but I think it's also worth mentioning that Catherine Platt really has held this together. I met with our Teachers Association earlier this afternoon, and payroll has been almost flawless. So we do have some support from a BOCES payroll expert consultant, but really during the days, Catherine has been managing this in addition to everything else. And she's done a fantastic job and was willing to continue to do it to find the right person. And I really respect that. So I just want to publicly thank her and in front of the board recognize that she's really bridged us and done a fantastic job. So now we have a transition plan with the incoming payroll clerk. Catherine will work with her. BOCES will continue to work with her for a couple of pay cycles, and we think she's going to do really well.
Great, thank you for making
thank
that
you.
note. Yeah,
Sure.
that's fantastic. So all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? So new business, moving on to the CSE, CPSE recommendations. May we have the recommended action, please?
Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the interim superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the recommendations of the committees on special education and preschool special education as presented.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So the next item is just superintendent search update. The board is actually going to go into executive session at the end of the meeting to talk more in detail about the timeline and next steps. But as we promised the community last spring, when Dr. Benante moved on to a new role, the board was committed to making it through the capital bond referendum. We made it through the referendum successfully. We met in retreat the Friday before Thanksgiving and decided to use PNW BOCES as our search consultant. And so we are already, I'm actually sort of working with him behind the scenes right now, putting together a timeline. And the community can expect to learn more about the timeline and next steps before we go on winter break. And just to give the community a heads up, there will be lots of opportunities to be providing input into what the community and the district is looking for in our next superintendent come January, when one of the things PNW BOCES does for us is lead a number of focus groups as well as puts out a survey. And as we are committed to doing, really would like to hear far and wide what people are hoping to see. So I don't have the exact times, but that's really what is ahead of us. Again, all with the intention of identifying a candidate sometime in the spring, and then having that person join the district on July 1st of 2020. You'll hear more about that. So the second opportunity for communication from the public, board reflections.
I'm sure that Carl might bring it up at the end, or you might, that this weekend is the production of Macbeth on both Friday and Saturday. You can see it
I'm
two
gonna
ways, two different experiences with two different Lady M and Mr. M, but if you can make it, please do. I think it's going to be great.
And I unfortunately am going to be away, but if we're moving into our winter concerts, I mean, so many really nice things happen in December. So it's a great way to bring that to an end. Any other board reflections?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Christine again for allowing Peggy and I to come in and see some of this science of reading. And I just, for those of us who aren't involved, intricately in education, it was really fascinating to see the kids work on phonics. I got to go into 3 different classrooms, 2 first grade classrooms and a kindergarten classroom. And teachers all did things a little differently, but it was all connected. And I saw 2 small group instructions and 1 first grade classrooms where they were using manipulatives to not necessarily count out the letters, but I mean, it was fascinating that, this is how kids are learning to read with buttons. And then one of the kindergarten teachers, was using her arm to tap out the sounds. And it's just, the kids seemed really engaged. Maybe it was just the few minutes that we were in there, but it was really, it's exciting to see, so thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things to see is a child who is really learning, really applying what she's learning how to read and decoding. And I got to see that in something that I saw, and it was really clear how hard everybody was working, and it's always a real treat to get to be in the school. Anything else? Shobana? All right. So I'm going to make a motion to adjourn into executive session to discuss matters leading to the appointment of a particular person. May I have a second?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?